we get started. Please come forward. Let's fill these front seats. Thank you very much. Kindly come forward and we fill the front seats. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you very much for making it on our second day of the launch of Grand Challenges Rwanda. My name is Andrew Kariba. I'm a journalist. My name is Andrew Kariba. I hope you're hearing me, right? Good, thank you very much. My name is Andrew Kariba. I'm a journalist and I work at Rwanda Broadcasting Agency. It's a national broadcaster. And I'll be serving as your moderator today. Thank you very much for coming on the second day of the for the launch of Grand Challenges Rwanda. So a quick recap of day one. We had remarks from different senior officials and delegates, of course, from Global Grand Challenge, AUDA and NEPAD and SFA Foundation. We also had remarks from ES of NCST, that's National Council for Science and Technology. We also, on day one, had a keynote address covering global grand challenges, achievements, and prospects. We also had a panel session, which was very interactive, where we talked about prospects for research and innovation, development in Africa, and lessons learned from grand challenges, national programs from different countries, including Ethiopia, South Africa, among others. And this was moderated by Dr. Moses Alobo. We also had a press conference. We had international and local journalists from different media outlets. They are here. Of course, we can't forget networking and touring around for the exhibition. We had also a gala dinner. Hope you enjoyed it yesterday. So today is our second day, and we are going also to be talking about prioritizing research in vaccine and pharmaceutical products and services in Africa. But before we jump into the second day, let me first highlight some of the key success things that we witnessed yesterday, because we saw the signing of the MOU and launching the request for proposals by NCST and SFA for researchers and innovators to implement research projects in innovative frontier technologies for climate resilient agriculture, food security and safety in Africa. Of course, this initiative brings together the researchers from different African countries to work together and find solutions on what can be done to solve issues affecting our societies. We also witnessed yesterday the official launch of Grand Challenges Rwanda, and of course the guest of honor yesterday, Dr. Uwamariya Valentine, the Minister of Education of the Republic of Rwanda and co-chair of NCST Council, was around. So jumping into today's session, as I started saying, we are going to talk about prioritizing research in vaccine and pharmaceutical products and services here in Africa, and we are honored to host different experts here. It's an important topic today, which you can't miss being following us live on YouTube. We are going to see how research and innovation for vaccine and pharmaceutical industry can really boost Africa's economy and even health industry in general. We also see the vaccines, how the vaccines play a big role in primary prevention, in public health, as they allow the control of many infectious disease progression, in reducing complications, morbidity, and mortality. We can also talk about vaccines, how it represents one of the greatest achievements of science and medicine in the fight against infectious diseases. So, ladies and gentlemen, starting with our day 2 session, allow me to introduce the keynote speaker, Dr. Louis Kaitaire, who is the Chief Medical Officer at EFSTA Pharmaceutics, Cambridge, UK, and Cambridge, US. A bit of his biography before he joins me on the stage. Dr. Kaitaire brings over 20 years of experience in oncology and immuno-oncology in clinical research in Europe and in the US, with particular experience in new cancer therapy strategies. Dr. Kaitaire completed his medical training at the National University of Rwanda and was later an assistant professor in oncology at the Paris University of France. After 7 years treating patients with cancer at Gustave Roussy Institute in France, he moved into research of new therapies for pharmaceutical companies at senior positions at Eli Lilly, Cellnage, Bristol Myers Squibb, and EFSTA Therapeutics, and a biotechnology company. His work is on discovery, research, and clinical development of bispecific monoclonal antibodies in solid tumors, where he is now the Chief Medical Officer. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome Dr. on the stage for his keynote address.
Good morning. Thank you, Andrew, for your nice introduction. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to address you and talk about some subject of interest for me. A few weeks ago, Dr. Eugene Mutimira called me telling me about the project. Asked many questions. I was very much interested, and by the end of the conversation, I realized that this group is very ambitious with a clear goal to reach and a plan. I was very much pleased. So thank you for that. When you have clarity on your vision and you have the ambitions that go with that, you have accomplished already an important piece of your objectives. Next is going to be implementation, which is basically the topic of today. How can you move from this good intent to make it happen? So the question to me I need to talk about is how to use the R&D and vaccination make up a pharmaceutical type of group to help this country and Africa being part of the game. So I start my presentation by telling you why this is important, and later on I will tell you how to get there. So it is important to have this kind of initiative of R&D in vaccine and pharma, because it gives you a chance to access to biomedical innovation. It gives you an easy access and control of the common medication you see in your country, in every pharmacy. It improves people's skills, because once you establish this kind of organization, the bar of knowledge gets high, people compete to be there, and you leverage the field to a much more expert organization. And of course, there is a financial incentive. Let me talk about the access to biomedical innovation, point in case the COVID-19 pandemic. Although new technologies compressed decade-long product development to less than 1 year, when COVID erupted, the COVID vaccine, very quickly available, was not equitably distributed worldwide, leaving the majority of countries in a very difficult situation. So immediate access was reserved to those countries capable of having innovation biotechs, such as Moderna in the US, BioNTech and Pfizer in Europe, and AZ, AstraZeneca in UK. So then you understand how access to biomedical innovation is very important, to a point that some places like now Europe and the US considers now access to biomedical innovation as a security matter. It's not longer just patients. Oh, sorry. Okay. Oh. Hello, do you hear me? Perfect. So you understand now that if you have in your place, the facilities we're talking about today, then you have access to innovation. And when you have this structure that you're trying to set up in here, you also have is access and control of the common medications. So it's a fact that is unfortunate that most of the time in developing countries, the healthcare is almost outsourced to external providers who come to the country just for business. I think it would be good to take control and be the decider and not just be someone who pay for anyone bringing any medication in the country. An important step towards that important goal could be, again, to establish an R&D department dedicated to vaccination or other things. Another reason it's an important benefit for the country is, although we focus on mRNA vaccine today, we can think broader than that. Countries are flooded with generic antibiotics, malaria, anti-malaria products, and it's a good thing. I'm not saying that generics are not good, they are cheap and can be effective, but the rules and regulation are not as tight as the rules governing reference products, which sometimes may lead to some company fighting for low prices to provide a drug whose name could be whatever you want, but whose active ingredients could be underdosed. So if you have a good facility of manufacturing that is capable of doing things as sophisticated as mRNA vaccine, that an easy shot to be done, it's much more simpler, can be done as a side objective, but still useful for the country and the people. Another point on necessity of ease access and control on common medication is what you have seen following the COVID-19 lockdown with factory closure. We have seen shortage of essential medication that's still ongoing. It's not only in here in Africa, it's been everywhere. part of it was, of course, the lockdown, but part of it is manufacturing and quality issues, supply chain bottleneck. If you have in place a group that can address R&D, can address manufacturing, you have gained a good solution for you and your people. So the project of having an R&D facility for vaccine within a pharma frame is going to leverage the field and set the bar high for everybody. It's not a random chance if the major biopharma like mine are located in Boston and US and Cambridge, US. It's because the major universities are around there. So it was a move that was a two-way street benefiting both the biotechnology, the biofarms, and the academic cancer center, each one teaching to others how to proceed. And it has resulted in many life-saving medication. So again, that's a benefit to be able to have that in here, because all of a sudden you have a group of experts leveraging the field of research. And there is the financial incentive. Please read this paper, you have a chance, published by Ledley in JAMA. That was a cross-sectional study comparing the profits of 35 large pharma versus 357 large non-pharma. Trial done between 2000 and 2018. So the outcome was very interesting to know when you're in pharma, that earnings in terms of finance are significantly greater and better compared to other industries. Those industries include information and communication technologies, like digital technologies, oil, whatever you can think, and cars. So if you can succeed implementing this in here, you need no oil, you need no anything in the soil, you just need some brain around. And you can have financial incentive going way above the care of the patient, because this would help the entire country. So now, how do we get there? So there are many steps. Let's mention a few of them in here and develop them for you after. Number one, it's fair to say that when you look into biotechnology and medication, there is more than 200 targets. So there's so many targets, you cannot just go and say, I want to do pharma. You need to determine the areas of unmet medical needs. I mean unmet because there's no point on reinventing the wheel and making a medication that is already available. Once you have determined the areas of unmet medical needs, then you move to understand with what we used to name competitive intelligence, to know what is being played in there and what could be the best positioning. After, you need to review what you have at home and what you can do with that. Start partnership with major international university and pharma. And last but not least, you need money, you need investors to create an organization. I do not believe personally that this should be a government putting in a lot of money to create a pharma on its own. Government can create a frame, regulatory environment, supportive money, but you will need external investor to be able to get to some place. So let's now go into details of determining the areas of unmet medical needs. You need to choose from screening, prevention versus treatment of an advanced disease. You can do both, but you need to determine. It is clear that prevention and screening could be not only less expensive, but also the best way to cure some deadly disease, as opposed to waiting the disease to be in place and spend millions to try to treat the patient. You can look into areas such as infectious disease, which was basically the topic yesterday, but you can also consider that other areas such as psychiatric disease could make sense, depending upon the place and the population. Cancer is increasing. Other areas. So once you have determined where you want to go, then you start to saying, okay, what is going on in there? As I was on my way to embark to the airport coming to Kigali, I got a news which is the FDA is looking to the data of Pfizer vaccine against this respiratory virus infection, RSV, and it was going to very positively. And this is a virus that is deadly in pediatric patients. So very quickly then, you go to think what's going on around. Where is the competition? And you see quickly that the partnership between AstraZeneca and Sanofi is having something similar. So then, you know, the field of RSV is hot and hot. What do you do? Question to you, if you have all the money you want and you have the organization in place and your management asks you to go to RSV vaccine, would you go there knowing what I just told you? It's a question to you, but I think some of you may say, no, I won't go there because it seems complicated. That would be wrong. You still can go there, but you need to know more. You need to go into details of what these two companies and vaccine are doing, search for possible amelioration. Maybe those vaccines are giving an injection every 6 months for 5 years. Maybe you can figure out one if just one shot. Maybe this virus can mutate and give a variant that they cannot cover. Then you can use your ability, your artificial intelligence, and all the data you have to create something much better. So competitive intelligence tells you how to figure out your best niche, to weight the pros and cons of everything you're doing. So don't think about it. And then once you know the niche where you want to go, you know how the competition is doing, look back and see where you're departing from. What is the baseline? In Rwanda, you have already a structure for regulatory, Rwanda FDA. You have coming soon the EMA, the African medical agencies. You have a good partnership with BioNTech and maybe other things. So how can you leverage and use this baseline to support the current objectives you have? Of course, there is evidence that this is an asset, that these are assets you should be able to use and get to your point. Now, partnership is quite important. And you could see when looking to your baseline that already if you partner with companies such as BioNTech and Pfizer, you can use them to access universities they're using. You can use them to connect with some key academic cancer centers. So partnership provide access to technology easily and important when people eager to bring money and support to you, meaning investors, see that you're supported by significant and important centers. They check the box of credibility and ability to get to the task. So they like to see that you're partnering with a good advisor that may let you reach your objective. And I like to complete my presentation with an additional important synergy to consider. That is known as contract research organization, CROs. Those organizations provide research services to pharma. They operate as hired agents, carrying out specialized tasks and allowing pharma company to focus on research and strategy and fundraising. So those are the company you can use to go and recruit clinical sites, can manage the clinical site by sending clinical research associate to get the data, take the data back to you for analysis. They can do the regulatory submission for you, monitor everything, and do the pharmacovigilance task as well. So this is something of a low-hanging fruit. You can start from organizing this kind of CROs, and the benefit of it is once it's effective and known, all these companies making vaccines are going to come to you, to use you, to initiate the clinical trials. Think back when the COVID clinical trials started. They went to every place where there was a possibility to have patients. That was, of course, Europe and the US, but also South Africa, Brazil, and India. If at that time you were known to be part of this group, if a good CRO, it was just easy to come here and do the clinical trials, which in turn would have benefited some patients and the field. So think about it as well. So it's not going to be an easy path, but in summary, this is what I see as how to get to the objective of creating an R&D facility involved in vaccination in the frame of a pharmaceutical industry. Thank you for your attention. Please let me know of any question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Louis Kaitarire, for constructive keynote address. Please allow me to introduce my panelists to join him on the stage. Dr. Emile Bienvenu is the Director General of Rwanda Food and Drugs Authority. He also an expert for hospital drug and therapeutic committee and combines his pharmacology research with commitments in innovation and entrepreneurship. Currently, he is the country principal researcher for Startup Germany Africa, a 4-year German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs funded project from 2020 to 2024. His research focuses on therapy optimization based on pharmacokinetic and pharmacogenetic considerations, especially for HIV and TB co-infection. Dr. Emile, please, you're welcome on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, help me to welcome Dr. Emile as my second panelist to come forward and join us. My third panelist is Dr. Julien Nyombaire, is research physician at Project San Francisco. That's the Center for Family Health Research. He is a clinical a clinician with over 10 years of experience in clinical development and investigation of therapeutics and vaccines against a wide range of infectious diseases, pathogens, that's HIV and STIs, Ebola, malaria, among others. He has experience in clinical trials research in collaboration with both pharmaceutical industries, non-governmental research organizations, and academia. Dr. Nyombaire, please welcome on the stage as well. Please help me to welcome him as he joins other panelists. Last but not least, Dr. Paul McDonald is the Vice President of Modular Manufacturing Development at BioNTech. He joined BioNTech in 2021 with the responsibility for developing technical solutions for modular manufacturing, including the biotainer. He leads the group responsible for the global deployment of biotainers to regional manufacturing sites, including biotainer manufacturing site in Kigali, Rwanda. Prior to joining BioNTech, Paul worked in the biopharmaceutical industry for 20 years, developing and implementing manufacturing process for therapeutic candidates in clinical development, including protein therapeutics and mRNA-based vaccine. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. McDonald as well on stage as he joins other panelists. Thank you very much. I'll start with Dr. Louis. Following your keynote speech, you emphasized more on prioritizing research in vaccine pharmaceutical products, especially for services in Africa. What can Africa do to become a key player in the area of pharmaceutical industry, particularly in the vaccine research and development in general? Doctor.
So, you hear me now? Okay. That's a big and good question. And the way to come to that point is there's not going to be one single way. It's going to be a multi-pronged strategy, starting very simply by what I named as low-hanging fruit, because those infections you're targeting happen commonly in Africa. Then establish some places, at least in Africa, as capable of being part of the clinical trials. When a company is starting a therapy and they need patients, we need to see a hospital and clinic with doctors, nurses, and clinical research associates capable of handling the task. So there's a lot of experts in Rwanda, but now you need to have them in a group. I named a CRO, but you can name it the way you want. And once this is happening, then people know that they can come to you. And then those people will be, again, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Sanofi. As you do that to give services in patient clinical research, you're establishing yourself and your name. In the same time, you can co-develop what I say, something in unmet medical needs. You determine that, I don't know, you're going to infection, and this is the pathway, this is what's being done, and how can you get there? How can we use the facility you have already to reach that point? And so however, you need to know that all that will take some time, be patient, and keep the machine running. But you can already establish yourself as a place where to come, recruit patients for clinical trials, and have one single clinical trial or targets to explore in terms of R&D and pharma, and have the academia supporting you with publications, then you have already in a good pathway. And there's a lot of good models you can learn from India, China, South Africa.
Thank you, Dr. Louis. Dr. Emile, African countries are doing much to achieve better, like in terms of having a big vision in vaccine and pharmaceutical products and research, of course. What is FDA putting in place in terms of policy, regulation, and other requirements, of course, to improve public health through regulation of human and veterinary medicine?
Uh, Thank you, moderator. Good morning, everybody. Greetings from Rwanda FDA. As they mentioned, I serve as the Director General of Rwanda FDA. This is a government institution reporting to the Ministry of Health, mandated with the protection of public health through regulation of drugs and food. But in this conference, I think we are going to focus on drugs, pharmaceuticals, and vaccines. So under drugs, we regulate human medicines, veterinary medicines, medical devices for human use and vet use. We also regulate vaccines for human and for vet use. Under our scope, we also have medical devices for human use and veterinary use. So this is what we regulate, we as Rwanda FDA. I think what is important in this conference is, first of all, to understand how all these products get to the market. It's actually through discovery, through innovations, inventions, and new technology development. Why am I mentioning this? I'm mentioning this because the entire cycle will actually show us what is the role of FDA in protecting public health, because we actually provide the oversight to all different phases through which all these products are discovered. If I take an example of human medicine, a drug, for example, it starts by, we start by discovering an active ingredient, which at a later stage undergo a series of studies from preclinical ones to clinical ones. Why do we deal with preclinical studies? Because we want to make sure that the product is safe and it can present with the efficacy expected in human subjects. That is number one. Number two, once the new active ingredient is safe, it's not toxic, because preclinical studies, most of them, we conduct them in animal models. Even if we can use some laboratory means, what we call in vitro research. But once we are sure that the new active ingredient is not toxic, it is eligible to undergo clinical studies. Those are studies conducted in 3 phases in human subjects to make sure that the product is still safe and it is still present with the expected efficacy. But importantly, during these phases, we can propose doses and we can also detect the side effects, the adverse drug reactions that can come if this product is administered to human subjects. Why am I mentioning this? I'm mentioning this because all FDAs in the world are mandated with providing oversight to all these clinical trial phases. And this is what we also do at the Rwanda FDA, and I'm happy to announce that we are putting much emphasis on our clinical trial functions, because we want to make sure that all these new products that are being discovered by the different pharma companies being established in Rwanda will be safe and will present with the expected efficacy. But importantly, we want to make sure that, the way all these clinical trials are conducted adhere to international norms. Our objective is actually to set high when it comes to provide oversight to clinical trials, because as I'm mentioning it right now, this is where everything starts. Once a product is eligible to become a new drug, then the manufacturing processes can start. The FDA will play a role in licensing the manufacturing facilities through making sure that the premises are adhering to hygienic requirements. but also the process through which the product is going to be, the new pharmaceutical product is going to be produced. We still allow the product to be safe and adhere to quality requirements. This is what we do through what we call GMP inspections, good manufacturing practices. Another operation which we do, which is also very important after the manufacturing has taken place, is to register the product. This is something which we do through a scientific review, a scientific assessment of the entire product file to make sure that the product adheres to quality requirements and it is safe, and also it is effective as it was discovered. Once the product is on the market, we also have the mandate to keep monitoring the safety of these products, the pharmaceutical products, a drug, for example, including vaccines, once they are administered to patients. This is through what Louis was mentioning. It's a practice which we call pharmacovigilance. We actually keep monitoring the drugs on the market to detect and to assess new and unusual side effects or adverse drug reactions which can occur after the patients have taken all these drugs. So all this is what we do to protect the public health, and you agree with me that to succeed doing this, you need to put in place policies, regulations, and guidelines. This is what we do at national level. But I just want to highlight that it's good to have policies at national level, but it's also very important to think about harmonization, harmonizing your practices to practices at regional and continental level. We have already done this at regional level. We do this with countries at ESC level, especially for registration and GMP inspections. We have already harmonized our practices. And at the continental level, we work with already existing initiatives like those that are under African CDC, initiatives such as PAVM, partnerships for vaccine manufacturing framework, and other initiatives under AUDA-NEPAD, such as African medicines harmonization programs, and others. Another thing, and this is the last one I want to mention, another thing that is very important is the partnerships, to enter into partnerships with sister NRAs at continental level and globally. We already have some partnerships with African countries like Ghana, Tanzania, and those are maturity level 3 countries. We also have partnerships with the European Union member states regulatory agencies, one of them being Paul-Ehrlich Institute in Germany. We will be talking about biotechs. You know, this is a new technology, and if you want to provide oversight to this new technology, you need to enter into partnerships with the regulators of the country where this technology is coming from. So that's why we have this partnership with the European regulatory agencies, one of them being Paul-Ehrlich Institute in Germany, involved in the regulation of vaccines and biological products. The mRNA vaccines, which will be produced by BioNTech in Germany, are regulated by PAI. We are already in partnership with them and other sister agencies in Germany, in Belgium, and in France. So this is what I wanted to mention when it comes to protecting public health, but also when it comes to supporting research in this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bienvenu. Of course, we have time to give our audience questions if they have some. Dr. Nyombaile, you have extensive experience in clinical development and investigation of therapeutics and vaccine against a wide range of infectious diseases. Allow me to put this on you. What efforts do you think should be made to build global partnership? Dr. Emile has emphasized more about partnership. What do you think should be done, being in partnership, relationship, and also potential targets through proactive sourcing and advancement of pharmaceutical industries here in Africa?
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. And the presentation by Dr. Louis and the answers to the two questions before mine kind of laid the ground to the answers to how to build partnership and collaboration. And research and development, especially in vaccines, is very broad, as Dr. Emile just highlighted, of which manufacturing capabilities is just one component. So Dr. Emile highlighted how it starts from drug discovery all the way through toxicity studies in lab, and then animal studies. The products move to clinic. After clinic, even after the product is marketed, there's still huge body of work that the regulators still conduct. So I am of the opinion that to have a strong R&D framework at a continental level will only be possible if at its national level we have even stronger R&D capabilities. We've seen as a result of the pandemic, which was a tragic event for the globe, a lot of positive outcomes. It served as an eye-opener for the continent to highlight what was missing. One of which was, manufacturing capabilities, and one of the outcomes in partnership with BioNTech is now, they're starting to build, manufacturing capabilities. This will serve initially to resolve the issue of equity with regards to access to to the vaccines, but also will serve as a booster for the R&D overall in the continent. There are facilities in Rwanda. I believe there are other additional African countries that will follow. So as Dr. Emile just highlighted, manufacturing capability is just one component. So we'll have to build capabilities across the board, from the drug discovery all the way to post-drug marketing. And I think one key component of partnership or relationship that should be built is with the academic settings. Dr. Louis highlighted this in his presentation. At the end of the day, all the skills and the workforce which are conducting the work are trained. They should have the adequate training, whether it's for regulation or to conduct drug discovery, in lab work or in clinical work. We need to have the appropriate talent and skill force to conduct the work, at the forefront. I was talking about one of the positive outcomes that came of the pandemic was that we are building manufacturing capabilities. One additional opportunity that came on board is the creation of new academic programs in collaboration with the European Union. A few weeks ago was launched a master's degree and PhD degree in biotechnology at the University of Rwanda. This is one additional opportunity and outcomes that are coming out of this. We have an Institute of Biomanufacturing capabilities that will also create the appropriate workforce to work in the facility, such as in an industry producing vaccines. So in addition to academy, an additional key player in improving R&D capacities on the continent is with biopharma. A lot of time when we speak about biopharma, the perception is that it's only profit-based and oriented to profit-making. But I am of the opinion that biopharma companies have a lot to gain in partnering with nations on the continent and on academy, because taking as an example the BioNTech facility that is being put up in the country, it would only make sense if I was from BioNTech to have investigational products for the trials that are, for any infectious diseases that is being planned through BioNTech to be conducted in the country or on the continent, because this provides several advantages. We are one of the most affected area of the continent, of the globe, that is affected by these infectious diseases. It will only make sense to conduct this research in the continent and across the board, from discovery to phase 3 or efficacy trials, even after. So I know several biopharma companies have started to build partnerships with academy into designing the appropriate academic programs that are, that have as an output, target, individuals with target skills to work in, whether it's manufacturing or in drug discovery, clinical research capabilities, microbiology or vaccinology. So I think biopharma still represent a key player in the entire R&D framework on the continent. I will not dwell much on the additional key players in the field. Dr. Emile mentioned the Africa CDC. We have other key players as like the European Union, who is putting a lot of effort into continuous capacity building in the overall framework. So I would think that those are the main players to build partnership with in order to improve our R&D capabilities on the continent level.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Dr. Paul, could you please give us some insights or provide with us some manufacturing and skill development perspective on both which you think are important in developing a sustainable biopharmaceutical ecosystem here in Africa? Turn on the microphone, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Also, thank you for the opportunity for BioNTech to participate in the panel in this important discussion. Maybe, first of all, reflecting on what we're doing at BioNTech. At BioNTech, we're evaluating mRNA-based vaccines for diseases with a very high unmet medical need. And this ranges from vaccines against infectious diseases such as malaria, tuberculosis, which we know have a direct impact on the African continent, but also against cancer. In parallel, we're also establishing manufacturing capabilities and know-how, first starting in Rwanda. And that allows us to produce, QC test, and release these vaccines pending their successful completion of clinical trials and regulatory approval. And it's really that combination of research and development with establishing capabilities that will allow us to bring safe, effective vaccines to Africa while also making sure that they're produced to the highest quality. When we think of the project that we're doing here in Kigali, we first of all think of the technology aspect of the project. We're building a mRNA facility that's based on a modular concept, our BioNTainer. These are state-of-the-art clean rooms equipped with process technology to make vaccines for our pipeline. For these BioNtainers, they're equipped in a production hall, and they're also then attached to an auxiliary building which provides other services that you need to produce and release vaccines. This includes QC testing warehouses. When we reflect on the project, it's also important to realize that it's a people project also. And I think that's where we're also focusing on skills development. The vaccine biopharmaceutical industry in Rwanda is still at a fairly early stage in development, and it's important to think about how we build a sustainable ecosystem for companies to operate in. One of the things that we're doing is partnering with local institutions to really provide guidance on curriculum development and training so that graduates, when they leave their programs, are ready for work in the biopharmaceutical and vaccine manufacturing industry. We're also partnering with institutions such as the African Biomanufacturing Institute to allow people to get accreditation for the training that they receive at BioNTech. And then when I also think about the environment we're working in, as a regulated industry, it's really important to have a strong regulatory framework and a strong regulator in the country. And I actually really want to applaud Dr. Emile and his team for the work that they're doing to strengthen this regulatory framework. It's an important parallel project to our facility development so that we can manufacture, test, and release these vaccines.
Dr. Paul, still, you talked about skills. Could you please elaborate more the workforce skills that you think are really required to enable vaccine and pharmaceutical industries, and how these be developed in a sustainable manner?
So when I reflect upon the skills needed, and I look to what we do in our facility, we're looking for experience in science, technology, and engineering. These are skills required for people to work with our manufacturing processes and equipment, operate QC tests in labs so that we can manufacture and release our vaccines. And in fact, there's actually a wide range of skills required. These can cover skills from quality assurance to supply chain warehousing and multiple enabling functions that are required to operate an end-to-end facility, ranging from finance, IT, human resources. It really is a multidisciplinary effort. And I think what we're trying to do is help provide guidance to institutions so that as we look to the future, graduates are already trained for these programs. When we reflect upon the first roles that we're hiring, we're training those people at BioNTech and bringing some people to our training facility in Germany. However, I think we will achieve the word sustainable when there's a talent pool that already meets our needs for a wide range of disciplines that will cover research and development, working at CROs to manufacturing.
Thank you very much. Before I open the stage for questions, Dr. Kaitaride, if you could answer this. When you talk about pharmaceutical industry, could you please link this with drug development through research and development?
So you mean the link between pharma and the research? So it's immediate, because in pharma, when you start a research, we're basing it from some preliminary data published or hypothesis. And what we do is what's been said. We test a concept from preclinical modeling in cell lines, animal models, and when it passed that stage, then we go into humans, and into humans you have different stages as well, 1, 2, 3, and others, to make sure that what you're testing is efficacious, is safe in the population. So once you have assembled all the data, showing that the therapy you have experimented is both safe, efficacious, but number three, it's not known as much. You can produce these products long enough. That's the manufacturing capabilities, because it doesn't help to have a product you think is very effective and good, but you cannot scale it up to many population. It just become a good paper, nothing more. So in all these capabilities of manufacturing, efficacy, safety in patients, or together, then you have done the research you need to do. You assemble a dossier, you submit to regulators, and ask for authorization. And of course, you're going to get questions back and forth. And after that comes the commercial piece, which is you take this product to the marketplace and set up a price. Does it respond to your question? But the one thing that I need to say though, because there is this perception indeed, which is far more just interested in money, nothing else. It's there, it's gonna stay. But in the same time, if you look into any therapy you know on health that is effective, it's coming from pharma, not from academia. It's not because academia cannot do it. They can, but they don't have the structure, the capabilities, and they even intend to do it. They want to teach. So there is this complementarity and medication. So it's important because these pharma have been known to be totally dedicated, quick in action, and speeding up to bring medication. It's a whole field that you cannot do if you're not in there. I'm not sure I respond well to your questions, but please ask any clarification if you have one additional one.
I think maybe we'll give them time to ask questions. Thank you very much, Dr. Emil. If I could put this to you, how pharmacology research can be prioritized in Rwanda towards pharmaceutical industry growth in general?
How pharmacology research could be prioritized? Let me tell you one thing, and I'm happy to even announce that this is one of the strategies we have in the country. As you know, the country is already on the road to vaccine manufacturing. And our belief is that if you want to have a sustainable vaccine manufacturing agenda, you have to back it with a strong research ecosystem. If we talk about a vaccine manufacturing ecosystem, you need to look at different pillars. The regulatory framework, which is now headed by Rwanda FDA, is one of the pillars. Manufacturing is a pillar, but we also aim at building a strong research ecosystem in the country, which can actually back and sustain this vaccine manufacturing agenda that we are initiating in the country. In this pillar, emphasis is going to be put on a number of areas, pharmacology research being one of the areas. Biotech is going to be one of the areas, but there will be others like genetics and others. But pharmacology research is going to be one of the sub-areas on which we are going to focus on. How do we? I will not talk about prioritizing, but I will talk about empowering research in these sub-areas. In my opinion, we need, and this is something which we have in pipeline, we are trying to enter into partnership with advanced research organizations in the world. Maybe this is something which we can talk about later on, but this is something which we have already started, partnership with research organizations, simply because, as you all know, this field is growing quickly, and there are a good number of technologies coming in, and you can't succeed actually if you don't partner with other organizations to be able to operate what we call technology transfer. Because as Louis said, if we think about inventing the wheel, we will never succeed. We aim at transferring appropriate technologies to the country in order to empower research in the country. Another thing is to also partner with advanced universities. We are already doing a good work with University of Rwanda, but we are also partnering with other universities in the world to be able to strengthen our research capabilities in Rwanda. So those are few elements which I can talk about, but there are others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Nyambaire, if you could please share with us your experience in management of public health services delivery programs, national-wide and even international-wide.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. So I will try to link, although you mentioned public health, I'll try to link that into research on vaccines. So what has been the journey is that some capabilities are there, here and there on the continent. But it seems we are working in silos. You know, we have some quite advanced countries in the southern part of the continent or in the other part, but in East Africa, we also have some capabilities for clinical research. In the country specifically, we are working in various infectious diseases, initially with interest on HIV. It's coming back to what Dr. Louis mentioned about unmet needs. We have HIV, which has been there for more than 4 decades without preventive vaccines. That has been the main focus of our research. But coming back to R&D in general, one capability in conducting research with the specific pathogens cuts across all different areas. So once we have a certain set of skills, infrastructure, and capabilities, it can be applied to different other pathogens. For example, the institution where I come from, we've been doing mainly research on HIV, as I mentioned, but with the onset of the pandemic, we could shift almost instantly to research on COVID vaccines. Because the skills, the lab capabilities, the human skills to conduct this clinical research are broad and it can apply to different set of disease. Now we're seeing a global burden of disease shifting from infectious diseases to non-infectious diseases, to NCDs. We are seeing a rise of cancers, hypertension. These type of clinical research facilities that we have in the country can be easily shifted once we have, for instance, investigational products for NCDs, such as cancer treatment or cardiovascular diseases. And along the way, we have, as Dr. Emile has been mentioning, we have a strong regulatory framework within the country that is making sure that we operate under international standards and that the safety of the population is overseen in all the different stages of the research that we conduct. So it's a journey that involves capacity building at every stages. We keep learning and improving, especially that it was said earlier, science and technology improves. A few years back, nobody knew about mRNA, but with the pandemic, it's everywhere. And mRNA applies to almost everything. It can be used for infectious diseases, but also for delivery of non-infectious diseases, active ingredients. It applies in cancer. So we are going to see a lot of this in the next 5-10 years. There will probably be new technologies. Now there's a lot of genomics and bioinformatics that is being used in infectious diseases research, whether it's in the clinic or lab. So it's a constant capacity building process, and the framework in the country has been there, especially supported by our national regulatory body through the process. So, and we hope with new partnership with the vaccine manufacturing, the learning will continue, but improving the skills set in the country.
Thank you. Dr. Paul, Rwanda is collaborating with BioNTech to start the African mRNA manufacturing facility in Rwanda. What do we, or what should we expect from this partnership, of course, in terms of providing sustainable production capacity for mRNA pharmaceuticals? Turn on the microphone, please.
Thank you. I'm learning the microphone. Our priority as we come here is to, or establish our facility, is to ensure access to safe and effective vaccines for as many people as possible. And we're doing that through establishing our manufacturing facility here. The intent in establishing the facility is to enable a Pan-African supply so that across the continent, people have access to innovative medicines and continuous innovative medicines. Our facility, once fully operational, can produce approximately 50 million doses per year of vaccine. And we have the ability to add more manufacturing lines. It can also manufacture vaccines from our pipeline. I think the project was initiated very much in the context of the pandemic. And BioNTech is known for our COVID vaccine. However, we can use that same technology to produce vaccines against other infectious diseases, against oncology, against cancers. And so really the idea is that as our pipeline advances, as our clinical trials advance, we'll have the ability to manufacture and then provide access to those therapies from our facility.
I would love to open the floor if there are some questions, and protocol will help us provide the microphones. Please come here at the front. There is a question here at the front seat. Thank you very much. Just remind us your name and where you're coming from. If you could direct your question to one of our panelists, it would be much better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Agri Ambali. I am Senior Advisor in the Office of Science, Technology and Innovation of the AUD and NEPAD. I don't think it's a question, but I think just to make emphasis on the importance of the issue that the colleagues on the platform have touched upon. I think it starts with the Dr. or Professor Emile, then Dr. Julian, then the colleague from BioNTech, and I think he's also touched on it. There shall be no successful Grand Challenges Rwanda if the regulator does not support the process. That's what it is. Because whatever comes out of the research has to be regulated. And one of the challenges we have on the continent is this whole issue of the regulators not being proactive in supporting those processes. So it's quite good here that the colleagues on the platform have actually highlighted the importance of the regulator really providing that support to this whole process of research and innovation. And I think really it's a message to the Commission, and it's also a message to FDA that really they have to work hand in hand. Even on that, Africa as a continent, and I think they have also mentioned about it, we've got a lot of unique situations. We've got diseases that probably are pandemic on this continent, in which case some of the therapies that are going to be there will actually be used for the first time on this continent. We have probably enjoyed in the past the luxury of the vaccines, medicines being developed elsewhere, the safety of it being analyzed elsewhere, and we relied on that, on those discoveries. that luxury for the continent is no longer there for Africa, because we are having our own unique sort of like diseases. And at the same time also, I mean, as they have been talking about it, we are also having a case whereby we will be having a lot of made in Africa or discovered in Africa kind of like, therapeutics. In which case, the safety of those has to be tried right here on the continent. I'm happy Dr. Emile talked about the work that basically we've done on the MRIH, the African Medicines Agency, African Medicines Regulated Harmonization, of which he's been quite a strong supporter, leading into the African Medicines Agency. In addition, we also, as you know, AUD have started another initiative, what we are calling smart safety surveillance. This is really looking at the whole issue which I touched on about pharmacovigilance. You see, when we got the vaccines for COVID, what we did was we did a pilot in 5 countries: Nigeria, Ghana, Ethiopia, South Africa, and Kenya. To just make sure that we have got we put a process whereby we actually track the safety of those vaccines. I tell you that process has been very, very helpful, and the countries are talking about it. It's a pilot which we reported to the Minister of Science and Technology last September, and actually they even have asked us now to develop, first to develop a Pan-African sort of like safety, surveillance framework, and also expand the pilot. And actually we're now in that phase of expansion. Dr. Emile got an email from my office, from one of my program officers, inviting Rwanda to actually join that process. We are putting up 4 more countries: DRC, Rwanda, Senegal, and Egypt. So really, I think this is quite important in that actually the regulatory support has to go hand in hand with what we are trying to champion out of what the grand challenges Rwanda. Thank you. So it's not a question, I just want to comment on the importance of this particular topic as far as this launch is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the inputs. Thank you very much. I think there's another gentleman behind him. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator, for the opportunity, and the panelists for a great 3 years ago, when COVID struck, we realized that Africa had only 2% capacity to manufacture anything related to drug, medical devices, and equipment. And therefore, it was mandatory to see that if Africa would survive any other of such, and also future to be self-reliant, there is indeed need to drive into straight manufacturing of these stuff. Therefore, what has been presented by panelists is highly consistent to that. And one critical thing which Africa decided to do was to focus on also standards, because standards or standardization is critical precondition towards drug vaccine discovery, including drug administration in vitro or in vivo to persons. And therefore, we developed the African Standards Harmonization Model, which is called ASHAM in short, and does retrospectively consider all other standards known, including ISO, whether to adopt them, adapt, or to generate African, location-specific standards. For example, the case of Rwanda, which may not be fit into any of those international standards. And that's a SHAM model. And this also to be directing trade, business, and supply chains within Africa under the AfCFTA, African Free Continental Trade Area Agreement, using the ECOMARC from now henceforth. My question, and therefore, is looking at all the efforts that you have presented and discussed, how far or deep do you recognize the African Standards Organization, ASO, as a critical pillar through regulatory standardization processes that you have mentioned about here? And Rwanda is a member, by the way, of African Standards Organization, and the executive secretary, and all those is also Rwandese, coincidentally, Eugene. And lastly is, do we have a designated clinical trial facility within Rwanda for what has just been presented? I'm asking this because this has been a question. Where do we do, especially for the new discoveries? the pace on clinical trials? And who would be willing to do so? Do you see that as a challenge within Rwanda? I submit. Thank you. My name, by the way, is Chomora Mikeka. I am the Director of Science, Technology, and Innovation in Malawi, but also I'm the chairperson for the African Standards Organization Technical Committee on Medical Devices and Equipment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could you first respond to what he asked before we take more questions from the audience? Who is willing to respond, please?
Perhaps I can take the second question about clinical trial sites, and then FDA as the national regulator can respond to the ASHM question. So we have clinical research sites in the country that have been operating in different set of, infectious disease area. Mostly the one that are mostly affecting our region, HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis. We want to bring more. We want to build capacity for other sites to be created and operate, because as more light is shed on clinical research and R&D in general, especially with the inception of manufacturing capabilities, we hope and we think it will bring more clinical research protocols to be conducted in country. So we probably need to increase our clinical research capabilities. 1 or 2 sites or 3 that we have currently in the country will probably not be able to sustain all those different projects that will be coming in country. So we want to collaborate with other, especially government health facilities, especially for the site I'm coming from. We are partnering with university teaching hospitals to build these capacities, and in collaboration we've been able to provide trainings. I've been able to run clinical trials jointly with new healthcare facilities. These are new initiatives that we hope it will be expanded to many other government healthcare facilities, so that we have a big enough pool of research sites that are operating to international standards to be able to conduct these new clinical trials that will be coming. And I'll let probably Dr. Emil to respond to your initial question. Thanks.
Thank you. It wasn't a question, it was a comment, but let me comment on this. It's true that you can't succeed if the regulator doesn't drive or doesn't cooperate in the entire process. Maybe because Paul is here and not let me tell you what I said yesterday when I was concluding one meeting. You know, we work with our clients before, during, and after. And we do this because we don't want to surprise them, and we don't want them to surprise us. I think the message is clear. And Rwanda FDA, we play our regulatory role, but we also have the mandate to support the business in the country and even beyond. This is a policy that is taking inspiration from the national policy, because even the country, Rwanda itself, support business and allow everything to invest and be supported by anyone, including the national regulatory body. I just want to mention this because we know how to support our clients, the business community, and we also know how to not create a conflict of interest or to interfere where we don't have to. So this is something which we know how to drive properly. That's number one. Number two, also, I know very well also from my former capacity and even from my current capacity, I know very well. Also, we work very well with ARSO, and currently, actually, we are using some of the standards developed by ARSO, especially when it comes to regulate natural products. But, and here I want to emphasize that we as a regulator, we are not a standard setter. We are enforcing standards. And we do this because we don't want to create a conflict of interest. This is what we even do with the donational Bureau of Standards. Our Bureau of Standards, it's Rwanda Standard Board. We work very well with them. They set a standard and we implement standard just to avoid creating some kind of conflict of interest. When it comes to some other standards set at continental level, we use those that are put in place by us. So we work very well with them. There is no issue on that area. I think I responded to all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. If we could take one more. Okay, let me make them two. A gentleman behind, then I come here at the front desk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. My name is Patrick Mugisha from Uganda, and I'm representing Innovent Labs Africa. I've got, let me say, just 4 issues. Some of them might appear a bit controversial, but it's Grand Challenges Rwanda. They have represented Africa. Let us talk about them so that we learn together. One, we're talking about the pharmaceutic space, but technically Rwanda, just like many other, most of all, I guess all African countries, we are members of World Trade Organization and hence party to the TRIPS agreement. And of course there are those flexibilities. And one of them is, if you check even your patent laws, I think you're not allowed to provide protection for pharmaceutical products. I guess it's there unless you changed. But I believe you still have that provision, which should expire maybe in 2033 or 2034. So clearly, what does that mean? That means that even as you begin to navigate around the R&D landscape, innovation landscape, it means the law, your own law does not allow you to protect or patent pharmaceutical products. So what would be plan B? Then of course, you look at why also sometimes we do not exploit, and I think that's why Dr. Louis, when you mentioned that building pharmaceutical manufacturing capabilities is critical, because again, the same TRIPS agreement provides a leeway for African countries that we can exploit if we build manufacturing capabilities. The compulsory licensing provision. If we believe there's a need for us to address issues like the NCDs now, and we have the capabilities, then we can trigger that clause. But for sure, for things like NCDs, be ready for a fight. Because things like cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases has got its own politics. Indigenous knowledge. Whatever we're talking about here these are the conventional medicines. I don't know what room we have as Grand Challenges Rwanda, and I think maybe my senior ES, Dr. Mutimura, will maybe give a comment on this, because we need also a strong provision for indigenous knowledge. I happen to come from a clan. I'm a Mchiga from Uganda, and I come from a clan where we have what we call traditional bone setters. Traditional bone setters. You break your leg today, they'll call someone, he'll tell you, sit in this position. He'll pick a stick, break it a couple of times, you'll feel pain, and the bone gets in order. Now, the Western world will call that witchcraft. To me, I think that's telemedicine or teleconsulting. So, how are we going to navigate around those indigenous practices that can actually contribute to our space in modern day drug discovery? Apparently, those can actually provide good leads. They can provide good leads because there are quite a number of indigenous medicinal plants that actually have changed the course of mankind. And statistics show by WHO that close to 80% of Africans use still indigenous medicinal plants to treat their ailments. Yeah? So we need to look at that. And then partnerships is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. But the biggest we have, Mr. Moderator and our dear panelists, the biggest challenge you have with partnerships is when it comes, I mean, it's like entering a marriage, but you're not certain if things go wrong, tomorrow you decide to separate, what do you take home? That's a challenge, and that's the issue of now intellectual property. We come to these partnerships, global south, global north, we are all running left, right, center, but some of these clauses on IP benefit sharing are written in small font. That's why when you go to the bank to ask for a loan, terms and conditions are maybe font 7. But where you sign your next of kin, your address where you stay, font 14. You see it very clearly. So the question is, IP issues, why do we go silent on these issues? Because apparently that is where everything, you can't talk, what drives global manufacturing value chains is intellectual property. Last one, clinical trials. Maybe this is just an example where now I think should be advised to those in the medical research, Rwanda here and also maybe across the continent. I'll give a case in point, the story for the discovery for one of the most common drugs. Thank God we are all over 18 here, Viagra. I mean, the story of Viagra is one of the most exciting stories in this world. The discovery of Viagra was by chance. The initial pathway was to get a high blood pressure drug to treat. But through clinical trials, when patients who are brought as volunteers to take the medicine and give feedback, some men refused to take back the test drug that were given. And some were asking, can you give us more of that drug that you gave us? So they said, but why? Why do you want more? So only that they started now saying that, you see, apart from this blood pressure, there was also another thing that really happened. What was it? When they described that, Pfizer was not rigid. They put blood pressure discovery on the side. They said, this one is going to give us more money. That was the first blockbuster drug to make about $2 billion annual sales in the world. I submit, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mugisha. Thank you. Before we take one more question, which I think will be the last one, how can we respond to some of the questions he raised? But he directed one to ES Mutimura. Doctor, if you don't mind, if you could respond to what he asked, they can give you the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, for raising that question. I believe the question of indigenous knowledge can be put in the context of what we are talking about. Essentially, it has to be evidence-based. It's true there are several opportunities out there for our people in Africa that can create knowledge, that can be sources of deepening knowledge, that can support our population. But I believe that it has to be evidence-based. The examples you give are quite good. And here we are talking about research, we are talking about working together to explore opportunity to see what can work for our population. Indeed, that was raised a lot by the speakers yesterday and the panel today, that in Africa, there are a lot of good talents as well. But these have to be nurtured, these have to be supported, and provide evidence to solve our local needs. So if the indigenous knowledge you are talking about with a good example you gave can provide evidence, then they can be supported to move to another level. I thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I think, Dr. Louis can respond to some of the questions raised by Patrick about the IP.
So it's a question indeed that is, the first time I heard that question, I said, why? Then I thought about it. So why do we have IPs to start with? Let me give you just an example. I'm going to give you maybe the most striking or speaking example. When we do the clinical research in cancer therapies, from day one in cell models, animal models, humans, up to the approval, we spend no further than 1 billion of US dollar, 800 millions to 1 billion. So you can give it up to the community, but then you close the door. You have no money anymore. Or you can try to have revenue from that therapy, have your investors having the money back, and invest in additional life-saving medicine. So the reason why there is IP protection. So if you suppress it, which you can, nobody, because human or humans, are going to do anything about anything. They say, why I'm going to do this? So IP is there to help investor. IP is there to help people have creative ideas to make them happen. So, however, I have recognized that there could be exceptions to the rule of respecting the IP totally. Go back during the COVID-19 pandemic. All of a sudden, you have this technology with capabilities of life-saving medication. People were dying. ER rooms were full of people. And that technology could be easily produced by anyone else in China, in Russia, wherever, but they couldn't. That's a time when you ask yourself, when this kind of pandemic, where you think people are going to be dying very quickly if you don't do anything, in 3 years, some country will be empty of people, then you can really ask that question, because humanity is getting at risk because of the IP protection. But you ask the question and negotiate with the IP owners. That's the best way to do. That should be my first response. Now, coming to another comment you made about why having pharma supporting you. Let's assume the other way around. Exclude any pharma from what you do. Where do you go? What do you do? If you can do it, then do it. You're just being competing with pharma, because you cannot exclude them when it comes to medication. They'll be there all the time. So instead of excluding them, I would partner or marry them and impose my rules. Every country, the Rwanda FDA, EMEA, FDA, and China FDA, look at the rules they're using. They're different all the time, protecting the patient and the country interest. So don't exclude them, just sit on the table with them, have your vision of what you want, and go back and forth in negotiation. That's probably the best way, at least for the people who want to serve.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Emil, if you have something just to add on.
Yes, I just want to inform our colleague that what he mentioned, it's not because we don't know, and it's not because we don't want. We are aware of this item to add in our IP policy and IP law. And what I know is that we've been reviewing actually our IP policy, and maybe you can check and make sure where we are today. But what I know was that it was being reviewed to take into account a good number of items, the one he mentioned being one. But there are other items which we wanted to also add. I'm aware of these. If you have been looking at our IP policy, you saw that the copyright chapter was the big one. And there are reasons, actually. And we are actually graduating, we as a country. We are graduating, and we were aware of this drawback, and it has been taken care of, and I'm very sure that very soon, a new policy and a new law will actually be published, and will take into account that element. So we are aware of this, and we have taken care of this. Thank you.
I think I promised to take the last question from the front seat here. If you don't mind, can you provide a microphone? That will be the last one. Thank you.
I just wanted one comment. A Nigerian lawyer friend of mine has said, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And we can only negotiate when we have the vision of creating the space for ourselves and finding a way to make it profitable and ensuring that benefits accrue locally. So I think this was a very interesting discussion. I had a very different subject I wanted to talk about. It's really the idea of how are we looking at pharmacogenomics and the diversity inherent in African populations, and how can we harness that to create new programs that really leverage the diversity we have here for personalized medicine and to identify new pathways for drugs that could be of less toxicity. We know that in cases of drugs against HIV, African populations have high susceptibility and may need lower doses in terms of neurotoxicities that can happen. And so is this a space any of you are looking at?
Yes, Dr. Louis, if you can.
A point on that, you raised a very good question to a point that it's a decade or 2 decades old regulation from organizations such as FDA. When you present a dossier for registration, you have to present a dossier that represents the population, which is majority Caucasian, up to 10% African American or some Asian. Why? Because indeed there could be some differences and you cannot apply what you have seen. So which is force company like mine, when you're going into a clinical trial, to make sure that some population represented, and those population represented, the outcome is similar to the majority of the population. If it's not the end of it. It tells you maybe you should now focus and bring up additional data from genomics or this population, because you need to protect everybody. So it's something quite important, and I'm sure the Rwanda FDA also is knowing that.
Thank you. I think I'm going to give 30 seconds to each of my panelists to give us a take-home message on what we've been talking about. I would love to start with Dr. Paul.
Thank you again for the opportunity and participating. I think I'm reflecting upon the conversation. We're on a journey in skills and capability development. And I think as BioNTech, we're excited to participate in that journey. And the conversation here reflected what I think will ultimately be the development of an end-to-end ecosystem that ranges from research through clinical development and manufacturing. We may be in an earlier part of that journey, but the energy, the commitment that we feel as BioNTech working here is fantastic. And so I leave optimistic that we're on the right path.
Thank you. Dr. Nyambaide.
Thanks, Andrew. So if I had to summarize probably what is required to improve R&D is probably in one word is partnership and collaboration. But not any partnership or collaboration, it's a partnership of mutual benefit and providing a win-win situation for both parties involved in that collaboration or partnership. So there's a lot involved, as it was highlighted throughout this session, and a lot of entities or nations may not necessarily have all that is required, but with collaboration through different partners, pharma, academic, and international organizations, we will be able to achieve the overall R&D agenda for the continent that is required. So strong partnerships of mutual benefits.
Thank you. Please turn off the microphone. Yes, Dr. Emil.
Thank you. For me, from what has been said, coming from the regulatory agency, collaboration between among all actors is very important, and we, as the regulator, being part of the game, there is nothing wrong for having us, being part of the game. We can't see the regulator as, someone who is putting lines which you don't have to go beyond. As we mentioned, we are ready to participate in the process and to collaborate with all actors to have the process moving forward. Second thing, which that's my personal belief, but I know this is something which we also do in the country. A strong research ecosystem is needed to sustain what we are doing in the pharma sector, because this is the government policy. We are currently empowering the pharma sector, and my belief is that putting in place a strong research ecosystem is very important. And probably I just want to highlight the reason why I'm saying this is because all actors should actually be part of the game. And it requires flexibility and adaptability, and a quick shift, in our minds. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Emil. Dr. Louis.
What is the... Oh, okay. So we have to recognize that health for the people is essential. To a point that following again this COVID-19, some places like US and Europe have now considered that biotechnology is a matter of not only the people safety, but the country safety, which means we need to put our energy and the effort to get to the point. Structure like this one is the first step. Back years, when you look to places like, for example, China, up to year 2000, there wasn't no investment at all in this area. But now they're part of the most advanced, simply because they switched and focused and put energy and money into that. So our population are growing older and older, living longer. So with age, you have more responsibility, more disease. This gives us responsibility to prepare for them. And again, the frame of creating an R&D facilities is a good starting point. And I had to insist that this kind of organization, though, will exist and survive throughout collaboration, partnership worldwide. It cannot be something staying in Kigali. You got to go, to start in here, go out the region, the continents, and everywhere. So we should support it as much as we can.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of this session. Thank you very much. We've been talking about prioritizing research for vaccine and pharmaceutical products and services here in Africa. Thank you very much for the constructive inputs. Let me hope now we had something, or we have something that we can go on with. We are going to have a short break for about 10 to 15 minutes. We go for a coffee break, and then after that we have another session. Thank you very much. Please could you join me and give me a round of applause to thank my panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I've been reminded that we should first go and tour the exhibition before we go for the health coffee break. Thank you very much.
byari urusaku aho bakomeje byasaba ko nyine nk'umujyamo kandi baregeranyije.
I'm back in front of you. I think yesterday I did not introduce myself, and I'm happy that I'm going to be moderating the next session. My name is Esther Kunda, and I'm the Director General in charge of Innovation and Emerging Technologies at the Ministry of ICT and Innovation. And I'm very pleased to be that the next panel is really going to look at prospects for research and innovation development in Africa, and some of the lessons we can learn both from Rwanda and as well as Kenya and innovators in those spaces. But before we go into the panel session and I introduce you to the panelists, I would like to invite Dr. Vincent Okungu, who's a career health economist and a researcher at the Department of Public and Global Health, Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Nairobi. And he, among other research grants, he's currently a recipient of the Calestas Juma Science Leadership Fellowship, which is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, of course, under the Grand Challenges initiative. So he's going to be giving us a keynote under the theme Achievement, Challenges, and Prospects of Research and Innovation Development in Africa. And based on that keynote, we're going to continue the conversations with 3 other speakers plus Dr. Vincent to elaborate on the subject, deliberate on it, and have conversation with you here in the room. Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Vincent.
Thank you very much. All protocols observed, ladies and gentlemen. Let's skip some, yeah. Yeah, so I'm just going to talk about achievement, challenges, and prospects of research and development and innovation in Africa, whether we're engaging in rhetorics or we are making any progress. So let me begin by quoting one of our most famous sons in the continent. That's President Kagame. He says, where are we headed? That is in terms of research, development, and innovation. Where are we headed? What needs to be done to give science and technology their due weight in our development processes? And he adds, intentions are not enough to enable science and technology to become a developmental resource. It is action on the ground that will make the difference. In acknowledging it, he is acknowledging that, well, we have not done enough, even though we are doing something. Now, based on that, just taking some notes that, well, we have strong positive efforts to improve R&D in the continent. But what we have done is not enough. We can do some more. In most cases, R&D survey data in Africa is rarely complete. For example, of the 156 indicators of gross domestic expenditure on R&D, only 42 fields were completed. That is between the period 2023-2018. And R&D surveys most of the time exclude the private sector. And a lot of data are not current when you talk about monitoring R&D. Since 2010, just about a dozen countries submitted data for the Africa Innovation Outlook series. And because of our diversity, which is a good thing, but it's also making it difficult to report on R&D progress, since we lack an authoritative and overarching statistical authority. Now, the continent, as far as the 80s, had recognized that science and technology is very important for our growth, economic, social, political, technological. So as early as 1980, the then Organization of African Unity, OAU, had called for action, the Lagos Plan of Action, to build scientific and technological capabilities. And that is the time that they called for a 1% GDP allocation to R&D. And this was repeated, the 1% allocation to, 1% GDP allocation to R&D was repeated in 2003, 2005 through the Consolidated Plan of Action. And 2007 was declared a year of science and technology in Addis Ababa. And the same 1% GDP was reaffirmed with a STISA, which is expiring next year. So, based on all these calls and so on and so forth, have we made progress? Yes, we have made some progress, especially in establishing infrastructure, both administrative and technical. So, we have made efforts to develop centers of excellence where there's a call to either create new institutes where we require them, but also nurture existing ones and improve their capabilities. So we have biotechnology, centers of excellence of biotechnology, which are using existing national, regional, and international institutes. For example, in North Africa, the pharmaceutical biotechnology, and East Africa, which focuses more on the biotechnology research on breeding and livestock. Breeding and livestock feed. We have also established a Pan-African intellectual property organization to help protect indigenous innovations. And I think this was a subject in the last presentation and question-answer series. There's also active infrastructure for knowledge transfer and science promotion. So we're talking about NEPAD that has been driving the Grand Challenges Africa, and the reason we are here for the Grand Challenges Rwanda. There are also NGOs in West, East, and Southern Africa that are promoting science. We have the Science for Africa Foundation, we have the African Academy of Sciences, and so on and so forth. Other than that, we also have made progress in specialized research institutions, and I was just calling out Kelly Chabale's R3D, is it R3D, for making significant progress in terms of drug discovery in the continent. But other than that, we have very specialized institutions like the Theodore Bilhaz Research Institute in Egypt, the Pasteur Institutes in Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia, and others spread across the sub-Saharan Africa. Now, we also made progress in terms of scientific productivity. So you could see that some of the most prolific countries in Africa in terms of scientific productivity, led by South Africa by far, we have Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Tunisia, Kenya, Nigeria, Algeria, and so on. But still, we have very low share of scientific productivity, although you can see our production increased from 1.7% in 2010 to about 3% of the world share in 2018. And most of these is inclined towards health sciences overall. But you can see North Africa is more focused on science, engineering, and technology, while the sub-Saharan Africa is more focused on health sciences. And this, you can see, is driven by donor preferences, because that's the region that receives most of the donor-funded research. And then you see those donors are more interested in health sciences for very good reasons. What about innovation activity? So you can see, there are various metrics for measuring innovation, and you can see the Global Competitive Index that uses various matrices, metrics, and then we have the Global Innovation Index as well. So most African countries are as ranked. You can see in terms of Global Competitiveness Index, in terms of innovation, Mauritius, Rwanda, and South Africa are the top 3 in Africa. So we could also mention very telling innovation, very significant innovations, like the M-Pesa in Kenya, that was driven by the need or for a new market that is unbanked populations. But then there are also others that are more established, like the Dangote Group and the Orascom of Egypt, and there are many others that are reaching new heights in terms of innovation. But what we are saying is that given our potential, what we are doing is not enough. There is more that we can do. We have about 20% of Earth's surface. We have the fastest growing economies, most resilient economies in East and Southern Africa. We have a population of over 1.3 billion people, which is expected to double by 2050. 60% of the world's arable lands and forests, 30% of the world's reserve of minerals, and the youngest population of any continent. So, but if you measure that with our productivity, we are saying that, well, we can do more. We have, for example, 3% of global GDP, but less than 3%. We produce only 3% of global GDP based on our potential there. We have less than 3% of international trade, mainly raw materials, and so on and so forth. But we have the chance to grow this potential, especially now that we have the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfTA. This creates, arguably, the world's largest free trade area. It's a single market in Africa, offering tremendous opportunity for unlocking business potential across Africa and the world. And this opportunity, or this potential this has the potential to mobilize resources for funding R&D. And you can see consumers spending almost 16 trillion by 2050. So we are sitting on a very large potential that can be exploited to advance R&D. But then we have challenges still existing. And I would specifically look at R&D financing as a first challenge. Now, we've made quite some effort as Africa to resource R&D. But we're saying that based on what we've seen, based on the resources that we have, we can still do more to fund R&D. So as we speak, most of R&D funding outside South Africa, most of North Africa, is driven by external funders. Not such a bad idea, but it questions the agency and control of innovation systems in the continent. And I've just given an example where biomedical sciences predominate R&D in sub-Saharan Africa, while technology, engineering dominate North Africa for reasons that I've mentioned. We are also allocating the lowest percentage of our GDP overall, and very tiny, 0.4% of global R&D expenditure. But we have said that we need to honor the 1% GDP commitment. And if we do that, for example, we are going to have almost $30 billion for R&D, because the African GDP is estimated about 3 trillion by 2022. But the question is not just enough to say we are committed to allocate 1% GDP, because GDP is not seated somewhere like a bottle of water where we're just going to pour 1% and say, right, that's for R&D. How are we going to get that 1%? Because it comes from different sources. And what are those sources? So those are hard questions that, as a continent, and as we are launching the grand challenges, we must be prepared to answer. Now, how are we performing in terms of R&D? When you look at the performance of the health R&D as a percent of GDP by income countries, you could see most of the sub-Saharan Africa, I don't know, this thing is not reflecting there, but in the first graph there, you can see most of sub-Saharan Africa lies in the low-income category. Of course, we have lower middle-income countries and a few upper middle-income countries. But you can see our performance, the gross domestic expenditure on R&D, the GAD. If you look at the expenditure, the number of health researchers, the number of researchers by income, again, you can see the low income, that is the second graph over there. The low income category and the low income category, our performance is not very good. If you look at the proportion of domestic, proportion of health, of gross domestic expenditure on health, R&D, you can see again, the African region is performing fairly okay. But in terms of overall investments, domestic investments in R&D, you can see among the top African, you can see top African performers, Morocco and South Africa. You see the circle there at the bottom graph, that is where Morocco 1.5 billion and South Africa about 6 billion. Those are the best performing countries in terms of domestically resourcing R&D in the continent. So you can see where we are, how we are performing. That may not be visible to a lot of people, but if you look at the BAD, that is the private sector funding of R&D as a proportion of the gross domestic expenditure on R&D, first of all, you will see that most of that table is blank because we don't track. And if you don't track, it means it's not a priority. And if it is not a priority, it will not get funded. So only a couple of countries, that is Egypt and South Africa, are actually tracking private sector investment in R&D, actively tracking. Other countries, they are tracking the gross expenditure on R&D as a share of GDP. But in terms of private sector contribution towards that, is not actively tracked. And that is something that we need to invest in terms of personnel and resource, so that we are able to see how we are progressing. If we are at point A and we want to reach point Z, and this is the progress we are making. So if we are not tracking it, we are not be able to track that progress. But here I want just to highlight the funding gaps, the R&D gaps, R&D financing gaps, especially in East Africa, where you can see the proportion of external funding, for example, in Kenya, is about 49%. In Rwanda is a bit small, is about 23%, and Uganda and Tanzania. But the gray parts show you the funding gap, the R&D funding gap. So we still have a lot to generate, and this, ideally, will have to come from domestic resources to fill those funding gaps. Now, the second challenge I want to talk about is R&D policies, strategies, and accountability systems that we have. Because if you want to, for example, we have the grand challenges, Rwanda and so on. If we want to invest in R&D or any other portfolio, we must have a strategy. And we do have strategies as a continent. But a lot of these strategies are out of date, and they need to be updated so that they can speak to the business. So individual countries and the continent as a whole, we need a robust R&D strategy that is in sync with the speed of business. And it's just not the R&D strategy, because the R&D strategies will tell you these are our investment priorities and so on, and how much it costs. But we also need an R&D financing strategy. How are you going to finance those strategies? And with very clear pathways for domestic resource mobilization, that is what is going to make the R&D financing sustainable. And then we need to also have those accountability mechanisms at every step of the way with clear indicators of measuring progress. And I was just going to emphasize the point on R&D status monitoring so that we can be accountable to just the commitments we have made, the targets we've set ourselves, as you know, and that is what will show that we are actually committed to what we are doing. We have talked about a standardized African innovation scoreboard. Yes, it's there. The problem is that there was disagreement among the member countries on how to proceed with it. It might have been corrected now, but Prof is here, he might correct me. And then we have relatively weak econometric models for measuring STI progress. So we need a dedicated staff to generate STI indicators in every country to be done. Let me also talk about the evidence on return on investment, because a lot of times, even some of us policymakers, the politicians, industry captains don't understand the importance of R&D. And I can quote, let me give you a quote from former Mozambican president, Armando Guebuza. In a meeting after a meeting at the AU, he said, we had to call upon experts to point out the importance of science and technology, so that even those among us who have not yet understood very well how imperative it is to develop science in our continent can now also accept this task. In other words, without those experts to point out the importance of R&D, even the political leaders would not understand what it is, and they would not invest in it if they don't understand it. So it's imperative that we have a very good, long cohort of, to establish or to showcase relationship between R&D and investment. Now we talked about taking innovation to market, because if you perform R&D, you perform research, that's the science, and then you look at that science, the development of a product, and so on. If that product is viable, it can be commercialized, or it can be put into use. That's innovation. Now, some of the challenges we have as innovators, and I would quote my colleague, Professor Colin Merembwa, Zimbabwe. He said, and this is a challenge he's really experiencing in his work, we identify much, I asked for his image, so we identify much needed technical platforms such as phase 1 clinical trial units and advanced bioanalytical platforms for pharmaceutical profiling of new medicines. But we are failing to establish demands for them because of a lack of local pipeline of clinical studies and a skeptical client base, a skeptical international client base. So one of the challenges is we are facing as a continent is taking that innovation to market. But we also need very strong regulatory frameworks to support this. And also investments such as grants to help in de-risking innovation so that more innovators can come to the fore. And then there are active platforms that link innovators to investors, like what we have in Kenya, the Kenya National Innovation Agency, that is very strong at, we come up with a good innovation, then investors are made available so that, can take this to market. And then the question of unlocking the private sector, I'll leave this to one of our panelists because he has more ideas on this. But then we are facing the challenge of how can we make the private sector take the lead in R&D. For example, in the US, 72% of R&D is funded by the private sector. In Africa, South Africa leads with about 41% of R&D funding by the private sector. But we need to explore more options to be able to unlock private sector potential. I'll just end this by making reflections on some of the models that we can use to spur investments in R&D. And a lot of times when we talk about resource mobilization, the first thing we want to look at is efficiency. And one of the issues I want to highlight is the tax exemptions and tax relief for companies that are investing. It is said Rwanda loses almost 5 to 10% of GDP, of its GDP, because of these tax exemptions. So as much as we want to we attract investment, we also have to look at the incentives that are given and how much they are costing us. We should also start debating issues around earmarking and dedicated taxes to fund R&D, because other than the call for a 1% allocation to GDP, that 1% of GDP allocation to R&D can be actualized by, among other things, earmarked taxes. So what I would emphasize is that domestic financing is key to the success of Africa's grand challenges, to Rwanda's grand challenges. And let me quote one of Rwanda's sons, Dr. Kaberuka. He said, outsourcing the health of our people to the goodwill of foreign taxpayers is not a policy. It's an alibi for the absence of one. So what he's saying is we don't have a policy to fund R&D in the continent. Thank you. Sit down.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vincent, and you've really given us a good segue to expand onto this conversation. And thank you for taking the seat. I will now call upon a few of the other colleagues who are going to come and expand on this topic. Let me first call upon Kajuga Samira Joel, who's a research scientist in crop protection at the Rwanda Agriculture and Animal Resource Development Board in Rwanda. And she's a well-trained crop protectionist with a master's degree in crop protection. She has worked at the Agricultural Research Institute for almost 13 years. A very big round of applause for her. Next, we have Dr. Niasi Saliu, who's a senior scientist in the Technology Transfer Unit and is based in Duduville. He holds a PhD in zoology from Jomo Kenyatta University and University of Agriculture and Technology under the ARPPIS DAAD program. So before this, he worked as a scientist in the same unit between 2014 and 2015, and as well as in 2017. So he was the first coordinator of Afromont and the Land Matrix Initiative at the University of Pretoria in South Africa between 2018 and 2020. But more so, he is the one who has introduced ECP, push and pull technology in Rwanda. Very big round of applause. Our final panelist is Rukundo Jean-Pierre. He's an IT specialist and researcher with unconventional skills in AI, computer modeling application for environmental engineers. In 2015, he founded Beno Holdings, with the technology, Benoka technology. It became the pioneer of cruise control in Rwanda, and he's currently the largest provider of said technology for vehicle tracking services. Other than that, he sets out to define solutions to different challenges under Beno Holdings, where he's supporting different delivery products. So we're going to be expanding more on the topic of prospects for research and innovation development in Africa and lessons we can learn from Rwanda and Kenya more specifically. So allow me to start with Dr. Maybe to start with you, Dr. Saliu. Right away from what Dr. Vincent was talking about, what do you think African governments and funding organizations can do more? And I think Dr. Vincent alluded to that. What can they do more to leapfrog the gap of low R&D and innovation landscape in Africa?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I want to congratulate the colleague who gave the keynote. He described exactly the situation that is currently prevailing in Africa. Us being practitioners in the field for over 15 years, we really see ourselves or feel ourselves in what he was presenting. And most of the recommendations that he made were very pertinent, particularly the one of, spending more resources, allocating more resources in science and technology is critical. The second one that is very important is to come up with policies in terms of how to make these, how to sponsor or how to finance or help these innovations to move up, because we have the impression that even if there is a lot of scientific publications that are happening, that does not reflect really on the ground. And the last one, because the recommendations are many, is to try in as much as possible to inventory, to really have a clear picture of what is happening on the continent in terms of innovation, in terms of technologies that are available and products, and try to see how we can harmonize some of the policies, because some countries do have policies, but how these policies communicate with the neighboring countries is not very clear. Some policies are outdated, some strategies are outdated, and they need to be updated, and so that we can have regional and continent-wide kind of a framework to operate.
Thank you very much. And maybe coming back to you, Dr. Vincent, to add to that, I think Dr. Saliu just talked about what organizations should be doing, but what do you think funding organizations should do more on this?
I think before we even talk about what funding organizations and the leaders could do more, we need to know whether we are on the same page. Do we really know? Do everybody know about the importance of R&D? I think that's the first step that leaders and funding organizations need to be aware of, that R&D is a core of our business. And without R&D, we are not going to be competitive as a continent. And they need to be aware that it is worth the investment. Once that is done, then we need to come at a table, because now they have a common idea of the importance of R&D. We have to come at a table, because R&D is not a government responsibility alone. It's everybody's responsibility. come at a table and say, what is important for us? What are our priorities? And these priorities need to have a costed action plan and say, we are going to invest in A, B, C, D. What is our strategy for that investment? How are we going to generate those resources? From where? Our own resources, the private sector need to come into play, individual philanthropists, government itself, and a bit of support from external partners. I think that's the very first step that the leaders and industry and political leaders and research leaders need to do first. Come at that at the table and talk about R&D, invest in it, and then come up with monitoring systems and regulatory system, because as Professor Ambali emphasized, that regulatory system is very important for investments in R&D.
Thank you very much. And I think these are very fundamental key components of saying, and I like to use the word intentionality to bring together all the points around monitoring, having a same vision, costing what we have, and what Dr. Saliu was talking about around knowing what is actually on the ground and having a bit of an inventory. I think those are very key important factors. And maybe coming back to you, Joel, on you've been a researcher for 13 years now, and we're just talking about, is R&D important? Is it important in the people that are enabling the environment, if I should say so? What has been your experience so far in terms of your work and how you've seen it, whether there's been challenges, what has worked that you think we should be taking forward?
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, moderator, for this priority. As she said, I have been working as a researcher for more than 13 years now at an agriculture research institute. And I have been participated in different research projects. And from all this time, I can list some of the challenges we used to have. From my own experience, one of the challenges is the lack of poor linkage within academia, public sector, private sector, industries, and the end user. Why? Usually from the research part, for example, I can be running a research with ending up with a product, but in the way I don't involve the private sector or the end users. That yet they are the one who have to commercialize and the other have to adopt. And then the technology or the product remain closed in my office or in the institution. That's one of the gap, one of the challenge. Another challenge I can say is the knowledge gap for information and importance of R&D and innovation among people. You know, from the policy, they can have all the policy in place, but among individual people and private sector, they are not, some are not informed. This is because of lack of awareness, and this reflects the low demand. You know, normally researchers have to be put in pressure. We need this, we need this, we need this, from the private or from the industry, so that we speed up on what we are doing. Another challenge is poor linkage and share of information of opportunity in R&D across African countries. Usually there is a lot of grant at the African level or regional level, but I don't think that most of the researchers are informed. Sometimes we lose the opportunity and the grant, you come up to see after the grant and you are, so you didn't apply. I think researchers here understand. Another is you can be working on the same project in Rwanda or also in Kenya, but because we didn't have collaboration within us, we can be duplicating the same thing, and this is part of waste of resources. Because some of the researchers can start even adopting because the other country already started the initiative instead of doing the same thing all together. Another challenge is the adoption of research finding by the end users. This can be due to different reasons. One of the reasons I can say is sometimes a researcher can do his project without carrying out effectively the need assessment. Or you can be doing your research without involving the end users during the development of your technology. And this makes the adoption very difficult. I just say the two reasons. Another challenge I can say is limited fund of R&D and innovation. This can be due for many reasons. Even other panelists raise it up. So personally, I can have a research question, a problem that I want to address. And because it is not matched with the priority of the donor, that research will not be funded. And at the end, I will not have the money and the fund and resources enough to address that challenge. Another is the limited project period. This is something that we face. They can be called for application, project for 2 years or 3 years. And you know that to have a final project takes time. From idea to labs up to field, and after to the end users. This takes time. And as researchers, we take that opportunity because we say, let me apply. And after the project finish and you don't have yet the result. This in mind, saying that you can have the second phase or you will apply for another project. This is some of the challenge we meet, because sometimes you don't continue with your project. Means you don't have your findings. Okay. For the challenge, I think there are many, but I can just highlight those. But there is we have also some opportunities as researchers, and I think we can make use of them. One of them is the willingness of the government of Rwanda, which the willingness of the government of Rwanda with embark on the R&D and innovation as enabler for economic growth. One of them is the establishment of the NCST, the National Council for Science and Technology, which bring all together researcher, public institution, and private sector to come all together and work on R&D and innovation. One of the examples, currently NCST, they launch a call for application that encourage the working together with private sector, academia, and public government institution, and also with international partners, one from China and one from KB Switzerland, because of their expertise. And all together, we are sure that we can come up with something good. Okay. And another opportunity is the establishment of the Grand Challenge Rwanda, that I'm lucky to be participating in these 2 days. This will improve the linkage between researchers across Africa. Already we have contact with some of the research present here. And this will boost research present here. And this will boost researchers and private sector to do big projects and attract fund, a lot of funds, so that we can work together to come out and tackle major common challenges of in Africa. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Joel. And I think you've really put in perspective what I'll call it a personal but a shared experience among so many researchers in Rwanda and across. And I like the point you've ended on expanding collaboration between different spheres. And that will make me come to Jean-Pierre and ask him about his journey as an innovator and on the other end of commercialization of innovations. At the moment, what has been your experience yourself, and what have you been working on, and how do you think R&D can contribute to the work that you're doing?
Thank you so much, moderator. Good afternoon. As she said, I have a company. Now I have 3 companies, but the main one is Beno Holding. Beno Holding, we are doing research. And before joining NCST, and I need just to thank NCST, because he helped us our dream to become true. Why? Before it was not easy. Because it's not many private companies doing research and development, and then after that, they sell the product. In Africa, I think we are few of those companies. And to get that money to do research, was not easy because even the financial institutions we have in Africa, they don't understand what is research and the importance to do research. We all know that if you think a project, if you think a product, we direct think China, USA, and other countries. But we can do the better thing than them because we know our society. We know our need than them. So, before that, I was struggling to do those research, but after joining, after getting fund from NCST, now is improving. Right now we have a project, academia and the industry, we are doing together, and it's really promising that we will have a good product in Africa made in Rwanda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. And maybe coming back to Dr. Saliu around the work that you're doing on supporting researchers. I think Joel touched upon a few elements that both on challenges and opportunities. And it'll be interesting to hear from you on all the different innovation you've been able to support and the different achievement. What do you think should be done to advance differently research and innovation in the space that, let's say, researchers like Joel are in at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you very much. A complex question, but what I like about what Joel was mentioning, Joel basically touched on a lot of things. Her feedback was quite comprehensive as well, and she really nailed it down. The most important thing is the willingness, the willingness from the government. That's the word that really catch my attention. You see, in Africa in general, and if I go back to the agricultural technologies that I know very well, it's as if our smallholder farmers, who are the majority of the producers, are just left on their own. They are completely abandoned. And they have to come up with solutions, whatever solution that seem to work. That's the one they go for, and those solutions usually are not sustainable. But now, when our national research organization come up with products and technology, we find that there is limited investment from government. And even if those innovations were so useful, you find that there is few private sector companies that are willing to invest because they don't know about the market. Because there must be a market for them to invest in the innovations. And one very important thing also is the remotedness, the lack of accessibility, the lack of availability, and affordability of some of the technologies. So what ought to be done is really to continue supporting our research by, first of all, strengthening our extension services in the field of agriculture again. To have more private sector. You saw in his presentation that trying to track private sector investment as a ratio of the gross investment in science and technology, there was no accountability. There was few. The table was completely empty, so nobody knows how much money goes into this science and technology. So we need to support, we need also to tap from the resources that we have, like the youth. We need to bring more young people in this business and start promoting startups. And I also like one of her answers, like the Grand Challenge is going to be an opportunity to come up with grants that are going to help people to collaborate, banking on the youth and the innovation and the accessibility to information technologies. So, but really, investment in agriculture by government is really, really important because the skills are there, the scientific capability is there, the scientific knowledge is there, but just the willingness from our government to come up with a framework and also to invest, to put more money from GDP and commit, to put that money. And again, to come up with indicators, econometrics that show us at any point of time how much we have progressed from our targets, the milestones. Those are critical, actually. And that, by so doing, we will demonstrate that the innovation that we are coming up with can help revolutionize our agriculture and improve our livelihood. And if we get that demonstration, then that increased awareness will result into a creation of a market through increase of demand. So that's when market will come, and then it will be now working for itself and self-sustaining. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Coming back to you, Dr. Vincent, I think we've talked about different challenges, and we were again coming back on willingness of government, really being more aware of what's happening, where's the money going, increasing the funding, and now going on to commercialization specifically. Last night I was reading something around, is it in 2017, US was around 19 trillion GDP, and their R&D investment was around $500 billion into the economy. China almost the same, around 12 trillion with 0.25 trillion investment in R&D. And what you were saying that we as Africa, it's 3% of global GDP. It's also, again, similar to how much we're investing in our own R&D. So there's a bit of correlation on what you invest is what you get out at the end of the day. So how do we get this knowledge that is being created from R&D, from this innovation into the hands of end users? And how do we go from commercialization? Because I think getting to end users sometimes is also not only commercialization, but also even on the commercialization part. How do we scale the knowledge that is created in a research center for it to become, to be on the market, if I should say so?
Well, yeah, from research, development process, and then innovation, and then commercialization. So let me point out that not all innovation can be commercialized. And I am not a technological innovator. The others could be. I am a social innovator. And most social innovations, they may not be necessarily commercialized. I'll give you an example. I developed, using secondary data, and I developed economic models for financing universal healthcare in Kenya. And it's publicly available. It is an innovation that is currently being used by the government to reform the health sector financing for universal health coverage. It's not commercialized. I'm currently responsible for developing sustainable financing models for Rwanda's grand challenges, for example, Rwanda and Kenya. And those models and innovations that come from those models are not commercialized. And I gave an example on the commercial side. I gave an example of Professor Colin in Zimbabwe, where he's come up with these novel ideas for phase 1 trials and bioanalytical platforms for developing new drugs, but there's no demand for this platform. First of all, phase 1 trials in Africa, they're few. And if you find one person doing it, then this person should be supported as much as it could be. Sometimes our governments don't understand the critical nature of having, for example, a phase 1 trial. And he gave me a story of, him being kicked out of a government hospital because, we are not interested in research, we are interested in treating people. So you can find, these kinds of attitudes and a lack of support generally make people not be able to invest in, be able to commercialize their innovation. So part of the commercialization is raising the profile of these researchers. This is what we're doing, and this is how it can contribute to economic development, and then getting the product from the development stage to that innovation stage where, because if it is an innovation, it is something that's already accepted in the market, it can make a change, it can create employment. Yeah, thank you.
And maybe doubling down on what you were just saying, you just given a good example of phase 1 trials and being kicked out of a public hospital. What should we do to bridge the gap to bridge that, let me call it a knowledge gap, or is it an importance gap, or how we prioritize what is very important to us as a society? What do you think, where should we be acting?
Well, we may not have the answer, but the first thing we need to know, we need to do is, and it's kind of a rallying call, raise the profile of R&D. It should be up there with other interventions like, HIV. If you are allocating funds for HIV, you should allocate funds for R&D. And how do we raise the profile of this R&D? Having to engage in various platforms, creating that critical mass of a group of people that can engage governments and the private sector in various platforms that talk about R&D. Because that is the only way they will see the importance of R&D. And having raised the profile of R&D, then you'll be able to engage at the same level with governments and the private sector to actually invest. And investment doesn't just mean giving you money. They can give you premises, like what they are doing to us in very many institutions. They give, we can take this land, build whatever you want in it. You can take this building, put your equipment in it. That's still investment in R&D. And unless policymakers, researchers, private sector captains, and politicians speak the same language about R&D, it will be very difficult to drive that investment and final commercialization of an innovation.
Thank you. So Joel, piggybacking on what Dr. Vincent is talking about, what do you think R&D, for us to harmonize our language as for us who are in different spheres, and to harmonize our language, what do you think is very important that R&D and innovation would bring to transformation of a country or even the continent as a whole?
R&D and innovation is very important for the country. As you say, you can't come up with a product or a technology without doing research and development before. So the uniqueness, singularity of the country is first giving the priority of doing research, because things are going very quickly. There is changing, even in the well-being. 20 years ago, there was no smartphone. That is an example. Means people keep changing, they keep learning. And all those new ideas came with the few people with knowledge came back to the country and give skills to others. and the beneficiaries just acquire the knowledge and so on. So doing research, development, and innovation is very critical for the country, and that the collaboration with others is very key. For example, we are a developing country. You know, students go out and come back with new skills, capacity building, and then coming back to the country, they use the skills they have to train others or even to develop other technology in the country. So for me, doing research, development and innovation is a key for economic growth of a country.
Indeed, and you're quite right. And I'm going to do a last round of perspective from everyone. And to close out, Jean-Pierre, what is the private sector's view on how R&D should be funded? And what is your call to action to any of the actors that you believe is in the sector?
Thank you. First of all, we need just to bring on board the private sector, because right now, I am not sure that private sector has the information on R&D. Because even now, we can just have how many companies were there here? We don't. That means we still have to do more awareness. We still have a way to go to be together with academia and industry. And I am sure once the private sector take this as an opportunity, Africa, it will be a game change because of that. Right now, there is some challenge because I think this is the first grant to academia and industry. So every time the first one has some challenges, but I think that we're going to address, because we have a lot of meeting with the institution. I think that we address that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saliu. What's your call for action or advocacy for R&D?
Thank you so much. It's very important that we understand what it is, R&D, research and development. Ideally, in an ideal business model, as I can say, is that there is the research, which is characterized by series of experiments and trials and come up with some meaningful results that could solve problem. And therefore, we talk about a technology. Now, this technology has to be given to the end users to change their lives. Now, at the forefront, the innovator who came up with the idea and eventually tested it, piloted it, and validated it, is now supposed to hand over this to the end users through the private sector, and he's supposed to get in return some royalties, and these royalties can be turned back into research, or he can himself commercialize it if he has the capability Like for instance, a university establishes a startup. Now, we need to see more of that. But I'm not saying that the funding that we get is not good, but we need to see more internal funding that address problems that are pertinent to the people, like more money from the government, invested in protecting and governing and nurturing some of the startups that come from our universities and from our research institutions. And if that is done, then complementary funds can be more efficient in shaping and innovating and coming with new generation of technologies and products that could even go beyond Rwanda or beyond Africa and help the whole world. One of the examples that he cited was the M-Pesa. It was nurtured in Kenya. It was conceived, nurtured, and now it has become a regional product. Everywhere you go in Africa, countries have M-Pesa. So we need to see. He cited few, actually 3 of them. One in Egypt, I think. One in Nigeria, Dangote, and there are very few, but we want to see more of those. So that means more investment again. That's really the call of action. Nowadays, even to be much more in depth with the reflection, private sector, they have their own R&D. They recruit their own scientists. They recruit their own technicians nowadays. Some of the people who go abroad and learn and come with new skills, they find themselves in private sector. And the private sector bypass the research institution and do their own R&D, register them, and commercialize them. Okay, but ideally, research is a matter of sovereignty. Every country should get hold of its own research, and therefore government should inject more research and more resources and more personnel, and champion and push some of our innovation until they flourish, and then they can go on their own. Startups, spin-off, and other businesses, they can just push them, through establishment of grants. That is to caution and also to de-risk, like the word he used, to de-risk, because also there is a risk, because you might come up with an innovation and there's no uptake. So, and if you don't have a backup or a fallback plan, then you are likely going to fail. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Joel, what's your call for action? Or advocacy? What should we do? What's your last word on this panel?
Okay. My call of action is to continue supporting capacity building at all levels, from researcher, even individual people and farmers, private sectors, so that all are on board with what is going on in terms of R&D and innovation in Africa. Yes.
Dr. Vincent?
I think, I believe strongly the government and regional bodies should take it upon their responsibility to raise the profile of R&D and mobilize the private sector using various incentives to encourage them to take now the lead in driving R&D across the continent. That's what I would say.
All right. Thank you very much to our panelists. A very big round of applause. I don't know if there's one or two burning questions to our panelists. Any question? Yes, we have a question right here in front. Two questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, and really appreciate for all the insights from the panel. One is a question maybe we need to continue reflecting on, and this stems from what Joel was talking about. We have regional bodies that are meant to manage science and research. I was reading one of the strategic area for the Inter-University Council for East Africa, the strategic plan 2021-2026. The priority area number 5 talks about developing universities, research and innovation centers capacity for regional research and innovation that cater for a balance between knowledge generation and products, policy innovation in collaboration with industries and other stakeholders. This is the Inter-University Council, which is meant to manage the science and research in East Africa. So what is the problem? What is not going on? I think we need to start also thinking about the accountability mechanisms, which is also linked to the monitoring framework that will tell us that here we are moving from this level to this level, other than repeating or duplicating, which Joel was talking about. I think that framework was put in place to facilitate and address some of these challenges we are talking today. So the second aspect I want to also bring, which I borrow from the discussion again, is there possibility to have some unconditional funds, research funds? Because when we talk about innovation, and you already put some areas where you think people need to innovate, I think we're also restraining some other innovators. So is there a possibility to put some grants that will tell, if you have innovation in this, but just innovation to advance the industrial sector, please come, there is this seed fund and so on, rather than bracking them already in a certain particular area or priority area. That will help us to also encourage the young innovators. The last but not the least, we need also to think about the structure of our research. And most of the research we are doing, especially that which goes with the training or the academic training, like for PhDs, for masters, most of the work we do, when you go to Europe, for instance, or in the US, you are doing research similar in the same context here or in your home countries. We don't have grants to support people go and learn what other people are doing in the other places, because they have some progress they have made so far. So how do we learn from what has been achieved in Europe, in US, or in all these developed countries, rather than me spending 4 years learning on something that is almost somehow known in Rwanda or in South Africa, rather than getting the knowledge, go and learn what happened there, what did they learn, and what trajectory they did go through, so that we can also borrow some of these experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much for very insightful questions. Anyone want to take up those questions, comment?
Maybe I could go first. Unconditional grants, a lot of grants are actually unconditional. They capture very broad areas where you can do research and so on. So they capture from social sciences to the basic sciences and so on. So, and there are so many grants that are there. I think what should be in the point is that these funding agencies at national level should be more resourced. But then innovation comes from research. Unless it's that eureka moment where a fruit falls from the tree and you say, okay, so what is bringing it down here? But innovation actually comes from research, because you get your data, you analyze it, then you can develop product. If the product is commercial or a service is commercialable, or it's contributing to social change, then that's the innovation. So innovation must come from research. Now, part of our problem with the universities and what you are highlighting about the Inter-Universities Council is I teach in a university that is very poorly resourced. They're just simply trying to make ends meet, paying salaries as well. So even among the leaders themselves, there's a chance to think, focus, and innovate, and do research, innovate. Sometimes it becomes very difficult. So first of all, these universities need to be resourced. And that will be the essence of R&D and innovation, so that once as they develop, they can be self-sustaining from the innovations they are making and commercialization, the funds that are coming from these innovations. So we have to put first things first before the others. Yeah. Anyone else?
Okay, thank you very much. I like his comment. It's I don't know what's going on, but the regional bodies and that are supposed to promote science and technology and the issue of accountability. Of course, this is critical. We need to come up with a result framework, as if we understand the goals and the objective and the targets, we define them clearly, we can come up with indicators. And we find that a lot has been done. Government have borrowed money to establish a lot of centers. Sometimes donors from abroad have funded, but it's very difficult to have an accountability of what has been achieved over the years. And I think in this context, we need to have a grasp on all that has been done. And if we come up with a regional framework, it means that an innovation that has been developed in Kenya or in Rwanda can easily be, scaled up in another part of the continent and give chance to the innovators to enjoy the fruits of the innovation. So I think that is beginning, but we need to see more of that. I just gave the example of the M-Pesa, which is now being taken up almost in the region. And on the unconditional research grants, that is essential. I think Joel elaborated very clearly on the fact that you might be having an idea and you want to investigate and you want to do research on that one. But unfortunately, the grants that are available are targeting other subject area and you cannot apply and your idea finally dies or decays. So with this kind of such unconditional grants, whereby scientists or innovators can apply, could be a safe haven. You see, when he was presenting, he mentioned about South Africa and also other countries like Morocco being at the top. South Africa has a very strong Department of Science and Technology and a National Research Foundation, whereby they have an inventory or repertoire of all the academia and researchers. It's a country that I know very well because I've served at the University of Pretoria for at least 4 years. And there, every lecturer and researcher is ranked. And based on your ranking, you can access to funds if you have innovations. And you can take students to follow up on research questions. I think this is a model that we need to really replicate in many African countries. And by so doing, we can really push more our impact on the ground. And finally, there is the structure of research, the duplication and all that. Again, it comes back to trying to regionalize the questions. Let's say, for instance, a topic on maize. Maize is a very important crop for almost sub-Saharan Africa. And when maize is attacked by a certain pest, let's say the fall armyworm, automatically all countries are trying to do something. But it is, you see, fragmented activities around the topic. Each country has its own strategy for the same pest. Same for the desert locusts. But if we come up with a regional kind of structures, okay, that will help in avoiding duplication, mutualizing resources. For instance, if expertise is in Kenya, we can borrow that expertise easily. So that will help us to save time and to move much faster. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 30 seconds.
From the question Dr. Prof. Bizoza raised about how can we learn from a developed country, I think one of the solutions is to promote this kind of exchange of scientists. Scientists from Rwanda go to work, not for study, but working in another institution for some times. That is a very good proposition.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to close here. Please interact with the panelists even outside here. When we go to lunch, they'll be hopefully they'll be happy to network. But I would like to please let's give them a round of applause for very insightful words. And before we get off, I would like to ask Louis to give us our next instructions. Thank you.
Thank you all. As Esther said, and referring also to the program, this was the last panel discussion, and I just want to say thank you for your participation. I think since yesterday we had a good time, and we are happy that this launch of Grand Challenge Rwanda happened. Thank you again, thank you to all keynote speakers, panelists, organizing committee, our technical team, and sitting there behind our media team. Thank you all. And let us keep our networking, keeping in mind some recommendation needs for increased R&D funding, as well as partnership and involvement of private sector in R&D funding and adoption of research outputs as well as technology developed locally. In summary, again, thank you. Next, we are going just here closer. I think yesterday we didn't have enough time for just interacting with exhibitor. Then thereafter, we have lunch, not as yesterday, but it will be in the restaurants. When you go outside, you go straight to the hotel. So you go in the reception of the hotel and then your left side. Yeah, in the restaurant of this Radisson Blue. Okay? Welcome again. Yeah. So you go straight forward, I think. No, we are not coming. But if you want, you can keep some of your item. Let's go. Honorable Minister is there outside waiting for us for just exhibition. Thank you. Yeah.
Organization, by the way. Yeah. I was used to see that only in Western countries where I live. Because Africa has no trade country.
Yeah, we are trying to push.